Glass explodes inward like someone threw a bomb through the living room window, and the wind isn't just howling anymore, it's screaming like something alive and angry and desperate to tear everything apart. And Marcus Caldwell, the man who built a $300 million empire from nothing, is standing in the middle of his oceanfront mansion yelling his children's names over and over again, but his voice gets swallowed by the storm and the security alarms are blaring this high-pitched shriek that blends with the wind, and somewhere deep in the house he hears crashing like entire walls are coming down, and his wife Elena is behind him gripping his arm, screaming about the kids, asking where are they, where did they go. And then through all of that chaos, through the water rushing across the marble floors, through the furniture sliding like toys across the room, Marcus sees something that makes his heart stop completely, because their dog, a 3-year-old German Shepherd named Atlas, is barking furiously and running not toward the exit, not toward safety, but deeper into the mansion toward the east wing, where the structure is already groaning and cracking. And Marcus screams at the dog to come back, but Atlas doesn't listen. He just keeps barking and running toward what looks like certain death. And in that moment, Marcus can't understand why this dog that has always been obedient is suddenly acting like he's lost his mind. But what Marcus doesn't realize yet is that Atlas isn't running toward danger, he's running toward the only thing that matters. And to understand what happens next, we need to go back just a few hours before, when the sky was still blue and the world still made sense, because that morning started like any other morning in the Caldwell mansion, with the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the kitchen and the sound of 8-year-old Sophie and 6-year-old James laughing somewhere upstairs, probably playing with Atlas like they always did, because those kids loved that dog more than anything in the world, and Atlas loved them back in that pure, unconditional way that only dogs can love. And Marcus had bought Atlas 2 years ago, mostly because Elena insisted the kids needed a companion, and at the time Marcus saw it as just another expense, another thing to manage. But over time even he had to admit there was something special about this dog, because Atlas wasn't just smart, he was intuitive. He seemed to sense things before they happened, like when James had a fever last winter and Atlas refused to leave his bedside for 3 days straight, or like when Sophie wandered too close to the pool edge and Atlas gently grabbed her sleeve and pulled her back before she could fall, and the kids called him their guardian angel with fur. And Marcus would smile at that, but deep down he still trusted his security systems more than any animal instinct. He had spent $20 million on state-of-the-art technology, motion sensors, reinforced glass backup generators, satellite communication systems, because Marcus Caldwell didn't leave anything to chance. He built his fortune by controlling every variable, by anticipating every problem and solving it with money and engineering. So when the weather warnings came through that afternoon about a major storm system approaching the coast, Marcus looked at his mansion and felt confident, because this house was designed by the best architects, built with the strongest materials, engineered to withstand Category 4 hurricanes. And sure, the meteorologists were saying this storm could be severe, but Marcus had heard that before and nothing had ever come close to threatening his fortress, so he decided to ride it out. He told Elena they were safer here than on the roads, and she trusted him because he was always right about these things, except this time he wasn't. And by 6 in the evening the sky had turned this strange greenish-black color that made Atlas pace nervously by the windows, and Sophie noticed it first. She said, "Daddy, why is Atlas acting weird?" And Marcus barely looked up from his phone and said, "Dogs get nervous during storms, sweetie, it's nothing." And James was playing with his toy cars on the floor, and Atlas kept walking in circles, kept whining, kept looking toward the east wing of the house like he sensed something nobody else could. And Elena suggested they move to the interior rooms just to be safe, and Marcus agreed, more to calm her nerves than because he thought it was necessary. But before they could gather everyone, the power flickered once, twice, and then the storm hit with a violence that nobody expected. Because this wasn't just a hurricane, this was something else, something that seemed personally furious at this particular stretch of coastline. And the first window blew out in the east wing, and Marcus heard it shatter, and then the second, and then the third, and suddenly water wasn't just dripping, it was flooding in through gaps that shouldn't exist, and the backup generators kicked in, but the lights still flickered. And Elena grabbed Sophie's hand and Marcus reached for James, but in that exact moment a massive gust of wind tore through the hallway and something crashed somewhere behind them, and James broke away from his father's grip and ran toward the sound, because he was 6 years old and didn't understand danger the way adults do. And Sophie screamed her brother's name and pulled away from Elena and ran after him, and in 3 seconds both children had disappeared into the chaos of their own home. And Marcus and Elena tried to follow, but the east wing was collapsing, the ceiling was cracking, and suddenly there was debris everywhere, dust so thick you couldn't see your own hands, and water rushing across the floors ankle deep. And Marcus was screaming, "Sophie, James, where are you?" And Elena was crying, and somewhere in the distance they could hear Atlas barking, but they couldn't see him either. And Marcus tried to push forward, but a beam crashed down blocking the hallway, and he had to pull Elena back before it hit them, and she was screaming, "Let me go, my babies are in there." And Marcus was trying to figure out a way through, but the storm wasn't letting up. It was getting worse and his phone had no signal and the emergency landline was dead and the security systems had all gone offline and every single piece of technology he had trusted was failing him all at once. And that's when they heard it, Atlas barking with an intensity they had never heard before, not scared barking but purposeful, urgent, like he was trying to tell them something, and Marcus followed the sound through an alternate route, climbing over broken furniture, pushing through debris, and he found Atlas in what used to be the playroom, except half the ceiling had collapsed and there was water everywhere and broken glass and splintered wood, and Atlas was digging at a pile of collapsed beams and drywall, just digging and barking and digging and barking, and Marcus yelled, "Atlas, come here, it's not safe, we have to find the kids," but Atlas ignored him completely, which was strange because Atlas always listened, always followed commands, and Marcus waded through the water and grabbed Atlas's collar and tried to pull him away, but the dog fought back, pulling forward, growling not at Marcus but at the debris like he was angry at the wreckage itself, and Marcus yanked harder, yelling, "Stop it, boy, we need to find Sophie and James," and Atlas just kept digging, his paws scraping against wood and metal, and Marcus felt this wave of frustration because his children were missing somewhere in this destroyed mansion and his dog was wasting time digging at random debris, and Marcus thought Atlas had lost his mind from fear, thought the storm had broken something in the dog's brain, and he knelt down and grabbed Atlas's face and said, "We don't have time for this, buddy, please," and Atlas looked at him with these eyes that seemed almost desperate, almost human, and then went right back to digging, and Marcus stood there for a moment, torn between forcing the dog to come with him and continuing his search alone, and that's when he heard it and his whole body went cold because underneath all the howling wind and crashing debris there was another sound, a small sound barely audible, like a voice trying to break through, and Marcus dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against the pile of rubble, and there it was, a muffled cry, a child crying and saying, "Daddy, Daddy, help," and Marcus felt his heart stop and restart in the same second because his kids were under there, his children were trapped beneath the collapsed ceiling right where Atlas had been digging this whole time, and Atlas hadn't been panicking, he hadn't been confused, he had known the exact location the whole time while Marcus was trying to pull him away, and now Marcus understood and he started digging with his bare hands, tearing at broken boards, cutting his palms on jagged edges, not even feeling the pain because none of that mattered, and he yelled, "I'm here, babies, Daddy's here, I'm coming," and he could hear Sophie crying and James coughing, and Atlas was digging right beside him, bleeding from his paws but not stopping, and the storm was still raging. Above them, rain pouring through holes in the roof, wind tearing at everything, and Marcus was sobbing now, openly weeping as he moved piece after piece, and Elena had found them somehow and she was digging too, and they worked together for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, until finally they saw a small hand reaching through a gap, and it was Sophie's hand, dirty and trembling but alive, and Marcus grabbed it and said, "I've got you, sweetheart, I've got you," and they created a space big enough, and Sophie crawled through first, then turned around to help James, who was behind her, and both children were covered in dust and scratches and their eyes were wide with terror, but they were breathing, they were moving, they were alive, and Elena collapsed against them, holding them both, crying harder than Marcus had ever seen her cry, and Atlas was licking the children's faces, pushing against them, making sure they were okay, and Marcus just sat there in the water surrounded by the ruins of everything he had built, looking at this dog who had saved his children's lives, and something broke open inside him because Atlas had tried to tell him, because Atlas had known and Marcus hadn't listened, and if he had pulled the dog away a few seconds longer, if he hadn't heard that small sound, if he had trusted his own judgment instead of watching what the dog was doing, his children might have suffocated under that debris, and rescue crews arrived about an hour later after the storm began to pass. After they cleared enough debris from the roads, and the lead responder, a woman who had been doing this work for 15 years, looked at the scene and looked at Atlas and said to Marcus, "Sir, I've seen dogs find people before, but the precision here, the way he located them in this exact spot in these conditions, that dog saved your children's lives." And Marcus nodded because he couldn't speak, and the paramedics checked Sophie and James and confirmed they had minor injuries, but nothing serious, nothing life-threatening, and one of them said it was the small crawl space they had gotten into that protected them from the worst of the collapse, and Sophie had led James there because Atlas had taught her to follow him to safety, and she said Atlas was barking at us before the ceiling fell and he made us get into the little closet, and Marcus realized the dog hadn't just found the children, he had guided them to the safest spot before it all came down. And now, as the rain finally slowed to a drizzle and the wind died to a whisper, Marcus knelt in the mud of what used to be his perfect lawn, his $200 shirt ruined, his hands bleeding, his whole body shaking, and he looked at Atlas, who was sitting there exhausted, paws raw and wounded, but still watching over Sophie and James. And Marcus remembered every time he had dismissed the dog as just a pet, every time he had trusted his technology over the animal's instincts, every time he had thought he could control everything with money and systems. And he realized none of his cameras had seen the danger coming, none of his alarms had warned him where the kids were, none of his engineering had protected them in the end. But this dog, this living, breathing creature running on nothing but love and instinct, had done what $300 million couldn't. And Marcus put his forehead against Atlas's head and whispered thank you, and the tears mixed with the rain. And for the first time in years, Marcus Caldwell, who had built an empire on certainty and control, admitted to himself that some things are beyond technology, beyond money, beyond anything man can build. And in the weeks that followed, the family moved into temporary housing while the mansion was rebuilt. But something had changed in Marcus, not dramatically, not with announcements or grand gestures, but in small quiet ways, like how he now spent mornings with Sophie and James instead of taking breakfast calls, or how he installed a new alert system that worked with local animal rescue organizations, or how he funded a program training dogs for disaster search and rescue work, or how Atlas now slept on a bed in the family room instead of the fancy doghouse outside. And one evening, about a month after the storm, Sophie asked her dad why he was different now, and Marcus looked at her and said, because Atlas taught me something, sweetheart. And Sophie asked what, and Marcus said that sometimes the ones who love us know things that all our plans and machines never will. And Sophie nodded like she had always known that, because she was 8 and the truth still seemed obvious to her. And James was lying on the floor using Atlas as a pillow like he did every night now, and Elena caught Marcus's eye across the room and smiled. And in that quiet moment, with his family safe and whole around him, Marcus understood that the storm had destroyed his mansion, but it had also destroyed something else, something harder than concrete and steel. It had destroyed the illusion that he could protect the things he loved with money alone, and what grew in its place was something money could never buy: a trust in instinct, a respect for loyalty, and understanding that the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can control, but the ones you can count on when everything else falls apart. And that's why every year now, on the anniversary of that storm, the Caldwell family doesn't mourn the mansion they lost. Instead, they celebrate Atlas. They throw him a party with his favorite treats, and the kids make him cards, and Marcus always gives a quiet toast that nobody but Elena ever hears, and it goes something like this: here's to the one who never gave up on us even when we didn't understand what he was trying to say. And if you're still here, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. Have you ever ignored a warning that came from pure instinct, maybe from a pet, maybe from someone you love, maybe from something deep inside yourself that you couldn't explain? Because we all have those moments, don't we? Moments when logic says one thing but something else is pulling us in a different direction, and maybe, just maybe, those moments deserve our attention a little more than we give them. So drop your story in the comments. Tell me about a time instinct saved you or someone you love, and if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the loyalty you've experienced from someone who couldn't even speak the words, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who believes that loyalty is stronger than any storm, because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that love doesn't need to be complicated to be powerful. Sometimes it just needs to be faithful.